Today, before I start talking about Asterix, I wanted to mention two things. One of them being mildly challenging considering the rules I've set up for myself. So I'll begin with the easier one, and that's the fact that when I'm making these recordings for about 20 to 30 minutes straight, I am just focusing on something that is just purely positive, that just makes me happy, which I definitely have been missing, definitely more than I have expected or even realized prior to starting this project of mine because of the type of media that I usually consume pretty much anywhere on the internet. Let's just say that it's not the type that focuses on things that would be optimistic considering the current state of affairs. It's to be expected, but it seems to me that I've been doing it too much and it also seeped into my entertainment, into my escapism, and that's definitely something that I want to fight against. And it seems like what I've been doing here was effective, at least to a certain extent. Now, for the second thing that I wanted to talk about, and that's the type of protagonist of a story that I would like, and also I would like to aspire to create in my own story. And that all begins with my own definition of a protagonist that might be different from what others might consider a leading figure in the story, but it was molded by a great amount of stories that I've engaged with over the years ever since I started dabbling into personal entertainment. And it definitely shifted even further towards a certain direction during the past few years because I've been consuming quite a lot of Asian novels alongside with their Western counterparts, and that started forming my more defined version of a protagonist that I would genuinely like and self insert myself in. And ever since that happened, I started noticing some certain traits in protagonists of stories that I read years prior without ever really thinking about them in that way that I now find anywhere from uncomfortable to straight up find myself disliking them. And that circles back to my own definition of a protagonist that I will genuinely like. I really want the protagonist to be the one that makes all the choices good or bad and then is able to bear the consequences of those choices, not just some sort of a tool that listens to orders, accepts quests without thinking, just follows the line without making any substantial decisions that affect the world, the story, or the protagonist. It just feels to me that it's rather rare for a protagonist to fit into these warped standards of mine. I mentioned self inserting into the story as the protagonist, and then I don't want to be just led around on a leash. I want the protagonist to forge his own path, resist the story or the fate that the author prepared for him. I want the protagonist to be the one who creates the story, not the other way around, that the story is created and then we have this sort of a cardboard cutout puppet that is just being led around by the plot points, led around by certain characters without any input from the protagonist. Obviously, the choices should be good and bad. The consequences should always fall on the head of the one making the decisions. But I just find stories where the protagonist just does not have a choice more and more uncomfortable and unenjoyable as well. And that's how I started writing my laughable first attempt at creating my own tailor-made story where I would hopefully be able to navigate amidst the landmines that I've discovered over the years in stories that are otherwise very well written, by far surpassing anything that I'll ever be capable of creating on my own. But I really just want my protagonist who would be able to do the things that I've mentioned previously, who would be with occasional help from others capable of figuring things out by himself, grow stronger, acquire knowledge, solve some puzzles and overcome challenges. Of course, not always by himself, of course, with a cast of side characters that would balance the protagonist properly, antagonists that would be able to pose a substantial threat or even win against the protagonist, ultimately showing that even a protagonist can't always win. But I really want the protagonist to be the one who decides the course of the journey and even its final destination, even against all odds, with all the struggles that a story needs to be the driving force that in the end creates the story that I will maybe at some point write. I have to say that it's an interesting and maybe and most probably impossible task to balance things out with my non existent writing skills. I've never educated myself in the way of writing a what's considered proper story, how to structure characters. I've just read an absurd amount of stories from other people much better at it, much smarter than me, and felt like I have what it takes to create something of my own that would check the boxes that I want for a protagonist and for side characters, while making sure that the protagonist never becomes just a boring machine that is perfect in every way, shape, or form, always knows the correct answer, as if knowing exactly where the story is going in the future. I would never want to create some sort of a perfect being that's incapable of making incorrect choices or failing miserably at even the easiest of tasks. So that's something that I'm going to strive for, and I'm probably going to talk about this again in the future, maybe more than once, because it's a topic that I've been thinking about more recently and would love to talk about it more to myself, to, let's say, sort out my thoughts properly and even have them recorded in case that I forget something or that something in my thinking changes, and I want to be able to compare my own thoughts to the most current ones. So that's something that this sort of a journal that I've been making should be able to help with substantially. Now, I really need to talk about Asterix at least shortly, but this got definitely way longer than I expected and wanted. Although I do think that I was able to form a semi-coherent sort of a compendium of my thoughts on what a protagonist should be. Now, we finished the singing and dancing portion, and now Amonphopis is talking with his henchman Nexusis about possible ways to sabotage or ideally straight up ruin the construction of the palace. Their plan is to stop a delivery of stones that's supposed to come for the construction by not exactly any means necessary, but by the means of bribery. Next scene, we get introduced to another antagonist of this movie, Caius Sepulus, who's talking to Caesar about the current progress that the Egyptians are making in terms of finishing the palace on time. A scene where he's admiring Caesar's beast and finds out that they even included real boogers in his nose. He then reminds Caesar that not all of Gaul is conquered, Veni Vidi Vici, and that there is still the village of the indomitable Gauls. And also Caius displays a common trait in this movie where he's having a hard time recalling the names of the Gauls that Numeromis asked for help. And then in the next scene we see Nexusis bribing the person that's supposed to deliver the stone for the construction, and they end up throwing all the stones into the river. Then they deliver a tiny portion of the stones, just a few of them the size of bricks, instead of the enormous blocks that they need to finish the palace. Otis translates the conversation between Numeromis and the person responsible for the quarry, saying that now he wants to get paid and that there are no more stones in the mines. Asterix says he's lying, and Otis says no, no, he really wants to get paid. After resolving this misunderstanding, Obelix offers his services in making the guy talk, and he does in the usual Gaul way, which is by repeatedly slapping him till he spills out the beans and admits to getting bribed by Nexusis into throwing the stones into the river. And that's where I'm going to end it for today. It was mostly me rambling about my own delusions, but managed to fit in a small portion of Asterix as well. So, yeah, I'll have more for next time.